Magic is at times a game about resource management. And out of all the colours of Magic, none redefine what can be called a resource better than black. Spending life, sacrificing creatures, and making plays that verge on spiteful, black confirms that often the ends justify the means. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, I'm Nathan Cancel.
And we are here today to talk about the colour black. We've been doing a Colour Pie series recently, and we've been working our way through the Wooburg.
Yeah, knocking out the park.
We've been talking about it a lot. Obviously, with the release of the upcoming Theros block, I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about might get challenged, which would be interesting to see. And we can always go back over when we talk about Theros and find out where our predictions for each colour have gone and what's changed.
It's always fun being constantly wrong.
Yeah, well, it's good to be wrong sometimes, especially about complaints and things like that, because it shows that WotC and Wizards of the Coast are, well, same thing. WotC and Wizards of the Coast.
Good, fantastic.
Good start. that they're listening to the player base.
No, they do listen.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes them a little bit of time, but they do listen.
Absolutely.
Apart from story.
Well, oh man, all right. We can talk about the lack of story. Like, we've got to focus on the colour, because otherwise I might cry. Yeah. Today we are talking about black. Black is easily my favourite colour. You're not as up on it.
I tend to not have a favourite colour anymore. I think we touched on this in the last episode about how I tend to move towards blue, but that's more in terms of like experience of play. When I first started, I split the packs that I opened with my friend into, I got the black and red cards, he got the blue and white cards, and any green cards that we opened we'd keep ourselves. So typically I started off playing properly with Lorwyn goblins, so a lot of black goblins. So technically speaking, I was initiated as a black player.
Sure.
So I understand the ethos behind it quite well.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think for me, I don't know, black just for me is just... obviously, every colour has flavour. We wouldn't be talking about flavour in terms of colour otherwise. But for me, black has the most evocative flavour in terms of its mechanics, in terms of what it's doing.
Yeah.
I don't know, it just seems to be the most realised for me.
Yeah,
and
his characters are quite well defined as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just everything that it's doing in terms of a regular game, whatever the format is, just seems to be, if you say you're the black player, then people just know exactly what kind of a player you are.
Yeah, and I guess also things like the graveyards are really important, because it's like a secondary like hand, and if you're not accessing that, then you're kind of cutting yourself off of a major part of advantage. So black in general kind of inherently has a lot of powerful effects and a lot of powerful ways of playing. And in the same kind of way of like with D&D, of where sometimes you want to play a character that's a little bit evil or a little bit chaotic, so it's not like your normal preference. Like, it's kind of sometimes good to be bad.
Yeah.
And in the same way we talked in the white episode about how it's represented as being like the good colour and you're like the everyman colour. Like, sometimes you want to be a necromancer. Sometimes raising someone like a giant demon from the graveyard on turn 2 is really fun to do.
Yeah, sure. I think calling like white the good colour and black the kind of evil bad colour is a very sort of alpha way of looking at things.
Yes,
which is also, we've been doing this for every colour. We will go back into alpha and have a look of where the colours started after talking about where they are now. We can kind of see the colour and contrast. But whereas we discussed that white is maybe the righteous, the self-righteous colour.
Self-acclaimed righteous.
Yeah, self-acclaimed, self-righteous colour. Black is the amoral colour. Black is the colour of selfishness, of ambition. Yeah. And as we've been doing for all these colours, we're going to go into some of the major tropes. This is something that you've been looking at. You've been writing these breakdowns. So, if you want to take us into the colour black, I'll have a lot to say about each one.
Yeah,
as I say, it's completely my jam.
Exactly. Well, my view's a little bit more objective, whereas Andy's going to be a little bit more subjective.
Yeah.
Especially out of your decks, it's kind of the colour you utilise the most.
Oh, sure.
And probably you've had the most scope in playing around with all its different little like niche
Well, I mean, I remember
mechanics.
when we first started playing Magic on the kitchen table, playing 60-card decks. Every single one of my decks was black in some regard.
I remember in the Hidden Strings Assassin deck.
Blue-black Assassin's deck.
Damn.
I had my Orzhov Life Gain deck, which I just turned into an EDH deck. Oh yeah, it's completely my thing. Yeah. But I love it.
So to kick off, like a key trope in terms of like flavour is, as we said, being self-centered, and the importance of the self, especially to black, it's pretty absolute. And the whole point of black is that it wants to further its own means at a cost of whatever the hell it feels like it wants to pay. In the same fashion, it stands by power being one of the most important things, whether it's it's constantly sought after and looked for. Like, I mean, I think Black out of all the colours, as you said, is ambitious.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't want to sit back. It wants to generate advantage the most avariciously. Like, has a lot of greed around it as well, specifically being a card named Greed.
The card Greed, yeah, sure.
And a lot of the Black cards throughout Magic have very evocative names that are very succinct in what they do. A card like, say, Murder. Things like that.
To the point.
Yeah, exactly. Like Terror was the original removal spell, and it's cards like that and it's a very it's very evocative in the fact that it is. Okay, it's not necessarily inherently evil, but a lot of the way that Black's colour pie works, it works in the bad side of morality.
Sure. Well, I guess like morality being like a complete sort of spectrum, you sort of still think that anything which you do that is spiteful, or you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face, whereas the colour Black absolutely wants.
Oh, it doesn't even need a face. In most regards, it will happily lichify itself and not even have arms, of eyes, anything. It will go to the absolute extreme to get what it wants.
Yeah.
We do need to double down a little bit and state that this isn't necessarily always a bad thing. Like, we've had positive, like people like Umezawa is a good example.
Sure, you're talking about like characters throughout Magic that even though they're Black mana-aligned characters, they actually show something. They're not like completely evil.
No, and if anything, one of the things that comes up quite nicely if you look through the wiki, which I've said each week, it's a really good place to go and have a look because it has little like tidbits that are quite nice that I hadn't really considered. But the thing about Black is it's very obvious with the way that it does things that are bad. Like, it's like Sauron. Like, he's not pussyfooting around. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing and he's not hiding it. He's not like, it's the color that has like the least agency in going evil because it's kind of, it does it open-handedly.
It's so archetypally evil when it's evil. Yeah, sure.
They kind of, and even then, like, egotism, especially these days, we look at how Black's presented nowadays, it very much doesn't have that evil streak. Even, like, guilds like, say, Orzhov and Dimir, which, because they've been more recently expanded on, even then, like, it's not... I mean, Orzhov's a bad example because they're being very selfish, and it kind of falls back into that misaligned that misaligned white indoctrination kind of thing. But Black in general, like being selfish and furthering your own means, as long as you're not doing it in an antagonistic fashion, shouldn't be a bad thing.
Sure. Well, I mean, you look at characters like Yeheni from Kaladesh block is a really nice example of a Black aligned character.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas their morality is kind of a bit fudgy, but generally speaking, the needle of sort of being good or bad usually edges towards the good.
Yeah.
Like, they are a vampire. They're an ether-born vampire that sucks the life essence out of other creatures.
But she was the first one who discovered that particular technique of doing so, I believe.
I think so.
You went a bit drunk on the power of it.
There are other ether-born vampires in Kaladesh, but I think through their story, they're the one that they touch a Kaladeshian guard, suck the life essence out of themselves, and it prolongs their own short
and they
lifespan.
realise then that's something that they can use against the uprising to try to help in a positive fashion. And that's the whole point, it is a positive fashion. Also, the Aetherborn were very much, they had a limitation on their life. They knew when they were going to die, so they have like cards like live fast, die young.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, that aspect, as much as it's reckless, which you could argue falls more into like a kind of red side of psychology. In reality, it's not being inherently destructive or antagonistic.
But then, if you take it out of the bubble of context of Yeheni as a character is morally potentially good, just on the card, you still sacrifice a creature
for her to be indestructible.
Yeah, exactly.
And then whenever a creature your opponent dies, they get a +1/+1.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't. So yeah, her morality, their morality.
the Etherborn are genderless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a gender non-binary. Not like Ashiok, who only goes by Ashiok. You can they an Etherborn.
Yeah, sure.
You can't they an Ashiok. Ashiok goes by Ashiok, and Ashiok understands that Ashiok sounds weird in a sentence if you keep saying this way of
sure.
Ashiok. But coming back down to the basic tropes, death is very much a big part of Black's ethos. Whether it's necromancy about prolonging your own life, destroying other people, or killing other things, destructive magic, and it also has a lot of reanimation as a very key and obvious trope that's been since day one all the way through, and will probably continue until magic eventually takes over the world.
Yeah.
I don't think it will die. The other thing is that Black just doesn't really care.
No.
Like, it very much is focused on its own ambition and its own agency, and it doesn't really care about necessarily what other people are doing. Like, if you look at, say, how Liliana's representing the Gatewatch, yes, her storyline is very up and down in terms of morality. It takes Gideon literally sacrificing himself, spoilers, for her to survive the War of the Spark storyline. But she was willing at that point to sacrifice herself, eventually realizing that it freed her from the dominion of Bolas.
Yeah.
The whole point of black is it doesn't like to be under the control or influence of someone else. It wants to be the one that has the influence and control over other people.
Yeah.
And especially with Liliana, it's very obvious that over anything else, being free of her ties to the demonic contract and to Bolas was the most important thing to her. Because as much as being strong and powerful is important, having free agency is one of the real priorities to black. And we see that a little bit more now because it's an easier thing to slip into rather than being the whole
it's still
evil's bad and cackles.
Yeah, it still fits very nicely though, this idea of being free and having your own agency still fits very nicely into the trope of the self and the trope of being out for yourself. Because as we discussed when we spoke about White has this idea of a community, but it's definitely a community within a large group aspect. You could argue, like when we look at the Gruul guild from Ravnica, which is red and green, they're all about freedom and not being tied to a society.
Absolutely,
but they're still doing it within their own clan.
Yeah, it's an anarchy, but it's anarchy
against the establishment.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an established group of anarchy.
Whereas black is definitely in its own. Like Liliana wants to be free from her contract, and she's willing to make sacrifices, but they're all at her own pace.
And black characters are more likely than any other colour to still be at odds with each other because they're all vying for the same thing, which is each other's power. So you wouldn't necessarily have a group of black mages all joining together and being like, "Hey, let's band together as a League of Doom." They wouldn't do that.
No, not at all.
They're much more likely to stand independently, which is why you tend to get things like liches and stuff like that in Magic, in black specifically, because they want to persist that control over their own life beyond death.
Yeah, sure.
So, there's very much a focus on the self and on being egotistical. I think I've said in past ones about being nihilistic. That's not necessarily true. Because black does have very much a focus on itself rather than
it believes in its own power.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. In terms of like tropes, in terms of like mechanically, obviously it tends to fit all of the evil creatures or like the more, I would say misunderstood, but when you have things like nightmare,
I think people understand zombies
horror
pretty well.
But like those aren't. That you can't sit that one. Like you're not going to be a good horror. You know.
No, there are
the only horror angels are Traxa.
Yeah, there are no heroic horror cards.
No, I mean that would be quite nice to look into. But yeah, no, it doesn't mess around with its creature types either, and its classes as well tend to sit in this. But we'll break that down in just a little bit. But in terms of in terms of how it looks now, in terms of its flavour.
Yeah, sure.
If we'll look at the latest core set a little to kind of give an indication, but for the most part, if you look at characters, they tend to be much more morally ambiguous. You wouldn't be able to say that any of, say, the characters from Eldraine were particularly evil.
No.
Like I don't think either even the Godmother and things like that, as much as they are typically evil characters, they do fall into that black side. But I think at some point you have to have your good characters fall into white like Gideon, and your bad characters fall into black like say Nicol Bolas.
I guess well they have sort of black in their colour pie as well. Yeah. I think that's kind of true, and I think just trying to, I mean, obviously we try and get away from this idea that white's good or black's bad or whatever, but you have to have some sort of duality in these characters and some sort of defined thing. And I think that's why I like black so much and why it is my favourite colour, is because it's so much freer in terms of what it can do to achieve wins in gameplay or like the scope of what it can do in gameplay, especially when it's matched up with other colours, but I guess that's true for every kind of colour pairing. But if you have black in your colour pie, whether you're playing an EDH deck or whether you're playing like in sort of
even
in a limited environment, you know that you're going to be able to come at things from so many more different angles than say if you're playing mono red or mono white. You know, the amount of removal that's in black, the amount of sort of self-deprecation in terms of like getting rid of your own life totals, getting rid of your own creatures. Black is a little bit like blue in terms of it affords you to try and solve the puzzle as you go.
Yeah, it can be more, as much as every colour can be proactive, black very much can be a reactive colour, which is why blue-black is a very good control archetype typically in most standard environments, because you tend to sit on your removal spells and your counter spells, as well as having late game bombs and that kind of thing. I mean, black can still be very aggressive. One of the bigger things recently is that we are really doubling down on the vampire tribes. I mean, it has been tribes before. Like my first proper understanding of vampires being really good was when Zendikar came out.
Sure.
And you had 1-mana 2/2s, and you had Callistra Highborn and things like that, which were really, really powerful. And it was one of the first decks that I wrote up on paper, looking at like all the things I can do.
Yeah.
So it has been they have been around for a while, but it's very much settled into its core tribe, which works very well for it, because that idea of like vampires aren't necessarily inherently evil, but they need to feed on other people to prolong their own life.
I mean,
and how that's handled obviously is quite interesting, with the way that Sorin went about maintaining Innistrad, and it caused him to create one of the purest beings I've ever seen, just to maintain the ecosystem on Innistrad, which obviously I don't think that Innistrad's trickier, because a lot of their vampires strayed into red and were way more voracious. Whereas typically you'll look at vampires as being more stoic, as being a little bit more, they have like self-respect, you know, that they consider themselves to be very well-to-do, and that kind of that feeling of nobility almost works really well towards the black trope.
Well, it's funny that you're talking about vampires. I guess, like, obviously black has a huge array of different creature types or whatever, but vampires for me were also my first sort of introduction to Magic as a tribe that I like to play, and black being that. And it's funny that you say that, when they went to Innistrad they became black-red, I guess because of like the bloodlust aspect of Innistrad.
Exactly, yeah.
I always, because that's kind of where I started to come into Magic, like, properly, was around sort of Innistrad and then Dragon's Maze kind of time. And to me, vampires were Rakdos colours. They were black and red, as opposed to black, white, or black, white, red.
No, you don't see very many blue. There are blue-black vampires, obviously, even Ravnica. There was
like in Ravnica and
that
stuff,
kind of thing. But they're not quite as prevalent.
No, and it's just funny that looking at the game when I first started to learn, the thing that really grabbed me, and it's actually the set true for a couple of friends I've spoken, I've taught about Magic, they latched onto vampires as well. It's so well realised when you look at the mechanics that black inherently has, and how they relate to the creature type, and then how that gets expressed through the cards. So you look at flying, death touch, lifelink.
Yeah, exactly.
So you look at the Innistradi vampires especially, you have some of the vampire tribes, and they're all kind of broken down into their own houses on Innistrad as well.
You had 3 of them. You had the Stromkirks, the Voldarins, and the Falconrats, and then the Markovs.
So you had the 4 main houses. And, some of the houses had flying as their thing, which obviously some vampires fly in folklore. The lifelink aspect, taking your life energy to boost my life energy, which then on the cards would also synergize with +1/+1 token counters.
Yeah.
So the more life I took from you, or every time I hit you for damage, I would then get bigger and stronger.
The old school vampiric mechanic, which was once when a creature that was dealt damage by this creature dies, you put +1/+1 counter
all
on
that
it.
Kind of stuff.
Very good. It's obviously it harkens back to Senga Vampire, which we'll get to a little bit later.
And I think because when you start to play Magic, for a lot of people, obviously not everyone, when you start to play Magic, creatures are the main focus of how you try and make sense of the game. Black creatures, because they're so well realised, and because a lot of the time they fall into quite classic fantasy tropes of, the creatures of the night.
Yeah, skeletons,
zombies, vampires. Yeah, exactly. It's just so much slicker and so much richer when you see how those creatures are expressed through black mechanics. And I don't think...
Rather than just a dude who could be red or white. Or
blue. And obviously other colours have this as well, but I think black is just so much... I don't know, man. It's just so much cooler. Like, I love black.
Well, this is
what
I mean, and this is funny because this is what coming back to that idea of that idea of D&D of playing the quote unquote bad character. Like, black does just give you a lot to play around with, and it does feel very satisfying. As much as I guess it depends as well on the kind of player that you are. Like, as a typical Timmy, if you're going into the game that way, playing big dumb green creatures might be your jam, But realistically, I think that black does tackle some angles that other colours don't really do, so it's quite easy to, if you do like it, you're going to really like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. So, I mean, we've spoken a lot about how black is quite rich, and the feeling that black gets you.
Yeah.
I mean, what else do you want to talk about? Like, this is your outline.
So then if we want to break down, so that's like the feeling of black. Then the actual reality of black is kind of like what its established roles and mechanical rulings like typically. What slice of the colour pie does it sit on?
Yeah.
And it can be a little bit like white, of where it has a little bit of everything. But the way it gets a little bit of everything might be a little bit different. It might be very it can be very specific to the way that black likes to work. Especially triggering off things like death triggers and stuff like that, which obviously we'll look into. But one of the main things is life as a cost.
Yeah.
Talking about how you use your own resources to gain advantage. This is indicative on cards, things like Dark Confident,
Bitter
Blossom.
Yeah.
Cards that are inherently very powerful that you would look at as a newer player, especially. And maybe this is actually quite interesting of why you're so why you like it so much. But when you're an earlier player, you don't necessarily get how losing life could be a good thing.
Sure.
But then when you get to a point of where you're more educated, more experienced in your game style and gameplay, you understand that you're offsetting that disadvantage, again, air quoting here, for massive advantage.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it pushes newer players away, and that's maybe why green's a little bit easier to get into. But that typical idea of costing life as a cost, or even creatures as a cost, especially.
Yeah,
with
it's just,
cards.
again, like how we said in the opener, like another resource. It's not just about your life total trying to keep you alive, or your creatures building a wall. You can use these things. These are pieces in a puzzle which you can manipulate, right?
Exactly. Things like bone splinters, where you have to sacrifice one of your own creatures to kill an opponent's creature.
That card.
Diabolic Intent, which is a tutor, which you sacrifice a creature for 1 and a black to go and get any card from your library, put it into your hand. And then you've also got things like discarding cards from your hand, but as well as being a predominantly black effect, like something that you do to other people, it is also something that they can do to themselves of discarding their own cards for benefit. So in general, that idea of that willingness to sacrifice anything and use anything of yourself as a resource, it is very indicative across cards. There's always this idea of either you have to pay something to get something back with black, and that translates into the cards very succinctly. It is also very much the colour of removal. We talked about death. I mean, not necessarily even just normal, typical death. Like, it has a very good way of working around having answers to everything, whether it's through direct destroy effects like murder, or Doomblade, which was the original, premier removal spell for black. It can exile a lot with things like Vraska's Contempt, and what was the recent one? There's also been one that's very recently spoiled for Theros Beyond Death as well, but it's moving into the exile side, whereas white used to get that. Now black gets it a little bit as well.
Sure.
It tends to have a caveat. It's not just quite so simple or more expensive. It tends to be a little bit cheaper and has shock, a cost attributed to it. It also gets around things that are indestructible, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to get rid of with normal, typical destroy effects. The exile side obviously does that. But you've also got things like minus. Like
minus X. Well, this is something that almost no other colour does, really, in any respect.
I mean, red might do it in some small fashions when it's like giving like a benefit to attack and then a loss to defense. But even then,
which you'd have to creatively use, but it's not.
Yeah,
and then look at Toxic Deluge.
Oh, don't. Yeah, fantastic. 3 mana wraths.
Yeah, 3 mana wrath. But then again, you pay life to equal the minus X to sweep your whole thing. Again, it's a cost. And people whinge about cards like Toxic Deluge because it's like, oh, it hits everything. It's like, yeah, that's the point. Yeah. But I've also got to give something of myself.
Yeah, it's how much life are you willing to put into it.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I've played games because I play Toxic Deluge as my Karlov of the Ghost Council EH deck. And obviously that's a life gain deck, but I've played it in games where I'm sat on maybe 22 life and someone's got this huge Hydra that's about to hit me down. I'll minus 20 myself in life total to get rid of that creature.
Yeah, the black way.
Because that's the black way. That's how you do it.
Exactly.
You don't just sit there and go, oh, well, I guess I'll get rid of all their 3-drops. No, go hard. Sacrifice 20 life. Get there. Do it for yourself. Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
So then it also works by not only having sacrificing its own creatures for benefit, but also forcing your opponent to sacrifice creatures. This gets around the whole hexproof and shroud thing.
Sure. So effects like Fleshbag Marauder, Merciless Executioner, and Plaguecraft.
Or even Barter in Blood, where each player has to sacrifice 2 creatures.
Oh, sure.
Things like that. There are a lot of these kinds of effects in black. And then also, as we just touched on with Toxic Deluge, they do get sweepers. It might be really expensive one-sided ones like Ingaruk's Wake, or it might be the colour-shifted Wrath of God in Damnation.
I got with that last night, actually, yeah.
There's a lot of ones like Ritual of Soot as well, Consume the Meek. There's lots and lots of, sweepers with caveats that don't necessarily hit everything all the time, because Damnation is considered to be a very, very good card, and it's probably too good, hence why you get cards like Languish that came out fairly recently, giving -4/-4 to everything. So it is literally the colour of death. Like, it will find a way to remove your threats. In that fashion, obviously, it's the idea is that it's the only one that's allowed to be on top. You don't get to have nice things. I get to have the nice things.
Yeah, sure.
Which is quite converse, because typically Black's creature base isn't particularly resilient. It tends to have like slightly smaller sized creatures.
Yeah.
It'll offset things with things like having things like Menace, or having things like Death Touch, or again having something like Lifelink, of where you can kind of keep up and gain your reach that way.
Yeah.
So typically, its creature base isn't quite as big, so it needs to have these reactionary spells that allow it to kind of, keep up. As well as having Death Touch, Menace, and Lifelink. Flying, as we've already stated, is within Black's colour wheel in terms of evergreen mechanics. And then Flash as well has started to make its way into Black, because they're trying to tie blue and black together a bit more mechanically. In the latest sets, you've done red a bit more with when you play your second spell a turn, and then with Theros Beyond Death, it's going to be when you play your first spell in your opponent's turn.
I kind of feel like Flash is being brought into every colour, though. I've seemed to be finding cards throughout the whole colour pie where you can start crowbarring and flashing.
Yeah, well, we talked about this the other day about how it feels like an assassin. It does feel like an assassin kind of mechanic. If you're an assassin, Flash does seem like the right kind of thing.
Oh, sure,
to have in there. Obviously, we've had Skulk as well, which I don't think's necessarily going to stick around. I think they tried to find a new way to get a swing on small creature evasion.
So, all right, Skulk's a good example of a recent one, but they've also. Yeah, it's funny. I actually didn't think about this. Things like Intimidate and Fear.
This is one of the things we're going to get to a little bit later, because it started. Yeah, Fear used to be that any creature that had so any creature that was black or an artifact could block the creature, but nothing else could.
Yeah,
and then they changed it to Intimidate, which allowed it so any creature that was the same color as the creature, or again an artifact, could block it. And now they kind of moved more into Menace. And if you look at the words, Fear, Intimidate, Menace, they all have a similar kind. Exactly.
Yeah.
They all have a similar kind of feel. But the idea is that you are, take away the word Intimidate, but you are intimidating your opponent to the point of where they don't want to block you.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you look at all of these different mechanics, especially because these are mostly on creatures. Obviously, mostly on creatures. I mean, they're creature effects, but things like Death Touch, Menace, Lifelink, Flying. These are all things that promote your opponent not blocking. I mean, Lifelink to a lesser extent, but Lifelink always guarantees that if you get in, even if they do block, you're going to get some kind of advantage.
I guess what you're trying to say is that although there are black creatures with trample on them, they're much rarer.
Yeah, it tends to want to be evasive. It tends to want to be a bit more sneaky about things.
Yeah.
It wants to subvert. It does, and again, this plays better with it having, say, smaller creatures. Having like a 1/1 flying Lifelink for 2 mana is a pretty black kind of card.
Yeah.
As much as it's also a white kind of effect. It is a black kind of effect.
Well, I suppose if you look at one of the archetypal black creatures, if you look at Vampire Nighthawk, flying Lifelink Death Touch.
That is one of the most quintessential black cards. I mean, even the Aetherborn Vampire, whatever.
The
2/3.
The smaller
one, the one that doesn't fly.
They've also released a 1-drop one recently as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're just doing up. They're just going to get a 4-mana one that has everything. It has the Menace, Flying, Lifelink,
Death Touch,
just all the shenanigans. So then also moving past like creature mechanics, you've also got discarding. This is as I said earlier, as an effect, not necessarily as part of a cost. So this is preying on your opponent's mind, like in terms of flavor. Like we talked about this in our blue episode, about how black tends to flavor-wise prey on your conscious mind, picking apart your thoughts.
Yeah.
Obviously, Thought Seize is a fantastic card that plagued its standard environment. But that idea of for 1 mana and 2 life, obviously you have to pay some amount. You get to have any non-land card out of their hand, and it is galling to keep a really sketchy 6-card hand and then turn 1 and turn 2 just go, well, I'm taking the only 2 things you can do. Thanks, let's go to game 2.
I mean, please. I mean, even in the recent sort of standard environment with Ravnica Allegiance and Guilds of Ravnica, there were discard effects on turn 1.
the black-blue surveil discard effect. And
I
think I played one standard game in Arena that pretty much put me off entirely, which was I sat there and had turn after turn after turn. It was just take your best card, take your best card, take your best card. I've got perfect information. That idea of perfect information is obviously something that sits more into necessarily blue side, but black likes having an answer for everything and be able to look at your opponent's hand and pick that apart. Oh, it feels really dirty.
Yeah.
Which, again, works perfectly well with black's kind of superiority complex, shall we call it.
Yeah, sure.
So also, as we've talked about, like with removal and death magic in terms of killing things, it has a lot of reanimation.
Oh, yeah.
So in the original alpha set, we'll get to this, Animate Dead was a card in the set. It also has things like Rise from the Grave, lots of things. Zombify, there are so many cards.
Living Death.
Living Death. Oh god, Living Death's such a good card.
Yeah.
Living Death's a fantastic example of black doing everything it wants, of killing everything on the border, bringing everything back from the dead. I mean, yes, it's for everyone, but you're the black player. You've definitely
that's the cost, though. The cost is that happens for everyone.
It's parity.
But as the black player, you're going to be taking advantage of this more than anyone else.
Because you've been investing in your local cemetery when all the other...
you've been sacrificing your own creatures. Yeah,
like,
exactly.
why are you so mean? And then you bring them all back. That's delightful. These kind of effects, again, like when we look at the core set in a little bit, there's a lot of them even in today's standard sets that really like try to push for that. In terms of, I haven't got it written down here, but I've just thought in terms of when things die effects, things like, say, Death Pact,
Yeah.
and Dictate of Erebos. There's a lot of when things die triggers. I mean,
Edict effects.
Exactly, edict effects, as well as things like Sir Conrad's.
Yeah.
Whenever anything dies, when anything's put to the graveyard, there's a loss of life and a gain of life. This
and then
idea
when anything leaves the graveyard,
exactly
Conrad
same
also
thing.
deals you
There's
damage.
one damage and one gain. And this idea of draining life incrementally is another big black thing. Even if it's only one a turn, like things like say Blood Artist and Zinnaport Cutthroat. And what's the new one from Eldraine? What's her name? Ayara?
Ayara, First of Lochlann.
Yeah. And then not Murderous Rider. You have her in your Marchesa deck.
That's Ayara.
No, there's another one. The Knight, the Zombie Knight.
Oh.
One black. Whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card to lose a life.
Midnight Reaper.
Midnight Reaper.
That's from Ravnica Allegiance.
Yeah, so as you can see, like, these are all like recent cards in recent sets. So this is where they're very much pushing towards this idea of death. But it's not like a cycle of life and death that's natural. It's a cycle of life and death that's a little bit more.
Oh, you've caused it. Yeah, this isn't a Golgari thing of we'll kind of mulch over our graveyard to bring things back.
This is a recycling.
This is you targeting your things and other things to die for the sake of your own game.
And it's super frustrating to play against because how do you beat your opponent's strategy when your opponent's strategy is killing its own things?
Yeah, that's it.
I want to kill it, but you're just going to kill it yourself anyway. Whatever. I'm already getting like. Pre-PTSD
I'll make all these
playing.
really good blocks. It's like, that's fine, I sack everything.
I think I'm going to play my Marchesa deck later, and I think I'm going to hate it.
It's
horrible. But in terms of like this drain effect, like I say, lifelink's a big thing. We spoke about this in the white episode because it was a bit strange thinking about white lifelink on a righteous creature or from a righteous color because technically it feels a bit malicious.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, okay, vampires need to do it to survive, but at the same time, vampires you can't. It's very hard to argue that vampires are nice, just like creatures, you know.
Yeah, sure. Or in fact, they're even creatures. Is it Arvad the Cursed?
Yeah.
From Dominaria. They nail in this idea that vampires are morally bad by the virtue of the fact his character is trying desperately to not be his vampiric self.
Yeah, the worst thing is the more you try and resist it, the worse it gets and pushes you. Like, even look at a thing like Mavrin Fane from Ixalan was a white character, but the whole point was he was going pious. And it still didn't necessarily help. It still drove him completely and utterly loopy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So clearly not being a vampire when you're a vampire doesn't necessarily work.
No, it doesn't help to starve yourself because you just become literally insane.
Yeah, and then we look at, like, say, cards like Exsanguinate and other drain effects like that. There are a lot of, like, one-time effects of where you can drain, like, each opponent for X amount of damage. And there's a few other ones like it. Say, I think Drain Life is specifically a card where it's one of the black, and then you can pay an additional amount of black mana specifically, which again is something that Blacklight's doing a lot. It's very devoted to itself, if we're going to use like a current key term, but it likes having really intensive mana costs. But that's a card, Exsanguinate, that deals X amount of damage to all of your opponents, and then you gain that much life, which in EDH is insane and ridiculous.
I mean, it's interesting that card exists alongside a card which is black-white, like Debt to the Deathless.
Yeah. Which, and then it's a funny thing because black, and again, this is interesting because the further we get into this, the more you can see some colours can blend a little. Black's quite succinct in how it does what it does specifically. When it starts marrying up with other colours, it does it so well because for some reason it seems to be that a lot of the other colours do what black does a little bit. But when you join it with black, obviously those two things accumulate into something very, very powerful.
I mean, this is my bias just being devoted to black in every which way possible. But whenever I think of a colour pairing which has black in it, black is always the primary colour, and the other colour gives it that tinge of flavour. Yeah. You look at Golgari, where it's like, okay, well that's black reanimation with, green creatures.
The natural life cycle.
You look at black-white. Well, it's like, well, the life gain from white just helps me do more degenerate black things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that idea of where it's a very selfish community, which is literally the two words of black and white.
Oh, I could do 3 hours on Orzhov colour pairings. It's my favourite thing.
But I guess the
Magic.
whole point, I guess, with black is that specifically when you take away the white element, is that it's not for the benefit. It's still somewhat malicious.
Yeah.
I mean, like, as you can see, most of these black effects don't feel very nice in terms of like a normal human being talking about things that are okay. Obviously, they don't sound very good. But inherently, black is a bad, like, not a bad, again, like, but it does have...
It's amoral, it's
it
selfish.
has that trope that it will always sit on that ambiguity, and moral ambiguity is usually considered a bad thing, even though technically it should be neutral.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Most people should be striving for righteousness, but realistically, if you're not striving for either, I mean, that shouldn't be a bad thing.
Sure. Well, it's funny that you've been talking about sort of how characters relate to this, and we've been talking about a few different characters, things from like Kaladesh or Kamigawa, whatever. But you've written down here on the show notes that you've put Eldraine is a pretty good place to look at Black, which is one of the most recent sets, right? Actually, at the time of recording, we're getting Theros spoilers right now, but it's been the most recent set released. And yeah, I think if you look at Yara, First of Lothlwain, Sir Conrad, although he was on cardboard, he wasn't actually in the stories. But all of these different Black Knights from that set, they are very indicative of what Black is all about, because they're not evil.
No.
They're seen by the other. So in Eldraine, each of the colour has a court, and each of the court has their own kind of like what would you call it? Moral compass and set of ideals.
Way of ruling.
Yeah, exactly, which relates to what colour they are. And all the other courts view the Black Court of Lothlwain as being like the evil court or the bad court, but they're still part of the realm. Yeah. Queen Yara is an elf, which in the Eldraine stories makes her other from the humans or the giants.
Exactly, she sits into the grim side of it rather than the Arthurian
but
side.
She is still seen as being very loyal to the courts.
Yep.
She her whole story, her whole shtick is that she's looking for the Cauldron of Eternity.
Yes,
which is the Holy Grail.
As an elf, why do you need that?
Well, yeah, quite. But it's to kind of keep herself eternally beautiful, right? That's
Yeah.
what she wants. And her thing is that she marries a knight that she thinks is worthy, sends the knight off to find the cauldron.
Yep.
When they are presumed dead, she has a funeral for them, whilst literally in the same ceremony marries a new knight.
It's within a week. It's a week-long ceremony. I'm probably getting this exactly wrong, but it's like something like a week-long ceremony where it starts with the funeral and then ends with a marriage.
But,
and then the cycle continues.
Yeah, exactly, which to everyone else seems mental and completely evil. But you look at the flavour text on a lot of those knight cards, and a lot of the Black Knights have flavour text which show that this is a process they want to be a part of.
Yeah, they are devoted to this queen.
To it,
I mean, and this is how kind of kings and queens and kingdoms used to work back in the day anyway, that you would be whisked away from your little homestead because you happen to live in a country that happened to be run by someone who wanted to go to war with someone else's country. It wasn't necessarily a choice that you made. Like, at least these people are naturally devoted and have ambition. Yeah. This is the whole point. This is where the ambition
They want
side
to find
of it
the
comes.
cauldron to become the eternal king of Lothlwain, yeah.
And again, they're not going about it like, happy slapping everybody and doing it again in a malicious fashion. They're doing it for their own personal gain, kind of in isolation, and also for the appeasement of their queen. So if anything, it's pure, maybe is the wrong word, but at least it's a very consistent and a very straight way of looking at things. So
yeah.
I don't think, again, it's very easy when you look at a set like Eldraine where it's going to have cards like, the Big Bad Wolf and things like that. Big Bad Wolf actually went into green. Yeah. Because it was just a big wolf. Yeah. Look at like Clackbridge Troll. Like, technically in that story, the goat's are little dicks. The goat's a little dick. All he lives on.
What do you mean the goat's are dicks?
Because he lives on this little bridge, and all he wants they cause this point of contention, and then he just butt him into the river. Like,
we're talking about the folktale of the Three Billy Goats.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but there was in most of these Disney-ified stories, like, the bad side aren't actually always that bad. Like typically the good guys aren't. The morality of these stories is supposed to be quite ambiguous anyway, but with Eldraine it's a lot easier.
They usually end up in a murder one way or another.
Like, the evil stepmother is a black character, like the evil witch, like the Withering Witch, is a black character. Prankle, who kind of is a Rankle, sorry, Master of Prank.
He should have been called Prankle. Why wasn't he called Prankle?
I don't know, because they haven't employed me to
Prankle,
make
Master
names.
of Ranks.
No, yeah. Oh dear. But even he's like a Puck kind of character, as well as being a bit of a Rumpelstiltskin kind of character. And he was in the black side of things. But typically, again, like, that's because they tend to go out for self-serving means. Like, if you did do a Maleficent character, it would obviously, like most of your bad characters in most typical like Disney products and that kind of thing will always fall into the black side, because that idea of ambition and self-serving is separate from a good and bad morality metric, but typically it will fall into the bad side of it.
I think another little nice touch that they had in the set of Eldraine was what mounts each of the courts used as, like, to ride on. So, for example, the bears were used by the Green Court, griffins were used by the White Court, and then the Black Court of Lothlwain, they used giant ravens.
Yeah, which I think that's really cool.
It wasn't something I really noticed until you pointed out to me after the spoiler season. I was like, oh yeah. Like, you look at the Seb McKinnon artwork for Order of Midnight, or just the regular artwork for Order of Midnight, where it's got the knight riding the back of the crow. They're not necessarily meant to be scary or whatever else. They're still beautiful in their own way, but they're just foreboding, aren't they?
Yeah, well, the problem is with things like that, it's like, because ravens are considered to be like scavengers, so in the same way that 13 is considered to be an unlucky number because it's associated with a tarot card for death.
Yeah.
The tarot card death doesn't mean death, it means change. It's the death of one thing into the life of a new thing. But obviously over the years that misconception has brought it up to be that 13 is an unlucky number. So that's a bit of education for those that didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
But typically black will sit on certain tropes that are misunderstood.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we're in a fantasy setting, so you can flex your evil characters more into that. But I think going forwards, they're probably going to be a little bit more subversive with that. And as much as, okay, there's not many things, there's not such thing as a good zombie, but most of the zombies don't have their own agents. So they're usually led by a necromancer themselves, and that's the person who's kind of using bodies for their own purposes and their own means. But the Rakdos weren't considered to be that bad. Like, they weren't an evil. If anything, they were one of the nicest kind of guilds in Ravnica in terms of...
the Black-Red Guild, yeah. But I think Black and Red share a lot of similar tropes, actually, like in terms of we were talking about sort of the self-serving nature, or the winning at any cost. The idea of winning at any cost is also a very Red trope.
Yeah.
The difference being, I think, is that whereas Red is seen as being quite chaotic and quite like butting the system, which we in the West hold sort of the agency to rebel or the agency to question things like Red does to be in quite high regard. Black's way of winning at any cost, again, is this self-degradation and also the spiteful nature of, harming yourself to harm others, which inherently is seen as bad on all fronts.
Yeah. Well, if you look at like the far extreme of characters like, say, like Obnixilis. Like, Obnixilis is a prime example of a black character. He was literally a warlord of planes who would bring them to their knees, and he enjoyed the suffering of the Eldrazi. When the Eldrazi, like, look at Voidwinner's flavor text. It's something along the lines of you want to see. I love seeing like worlds fall. Like I'm just going to sit back and watch this one. Like it's so like he is such a bastard. And obviously it doesn't help the fact that he's been transformed into a demon. But it's always going to be like on the far extreme of Black's evil side, and then of course it's going to be quite bad.
The flavor text for Voidwinner is: "Have you ever seen a world fall to its knees? Watch and learn." Obnixilis. Great.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think also it's a lot juicier to get into the reasons why and the lengths that like characters are willing to go to find that, to succeed in their means. Like, if you look at how like Josu Vess was created to undermine Liliana's...
So this is Liliana's brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Who she was essentially killed when she was trying to heal him as a girl.
Yeah.
This ignited her Planeswalker spark. She leaves Dominaria.
And she thought that he'd died. What she didn't realise is that she'd liched him. And then he obviously had grown into the ranks and was used as a mean to undermine her campaign against Bells and Lock.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, if you look at, say, like the big bads, like most of the demons and things will naturally, obviously demons are manifestations of black mana.
Are there demons in other colours?
I'm trying
to memory banks.
I presume there might. Yeah, well, there's definitely red black demons because you've got things like.
Oh, of course, like Rakdos demons. Yeah, exactly. Sure.
And you might have the occasional blue one. Oh, I don't know.
Sorry, that's a big question.
No, it's okay.
Demons are predominantly black, though.
Yeah, but exactly. And the idea is that because they're manifestations of black mana, they inherently have to be.
Yeah.
And this is why I want to look. I want to see characters like Davriel Kane and his demon accomplices kind of put into and expanded more into, because that shows almost like a day by day, almost sitcom nature to black, of where you don't have to have such a singularity on the way that their
Davriel
personalities
Kane
work.
Is an interesting character, because Davriel Kane, for those who aren't familiar with him, even from War of the Spark, he was a character that was introduced through Brandon Sanderson's standalone novel Children of the Nameless. So he's a black planeswalker character that we're introduced to, and
he steals other people's abilities.
His whole thing.
Copy them?
Yeah, well, this is we're not quite sure, and I think Brandon Sanderson does explain it quite well in the book, but he's so much better writer. He's a better writer than I can explain his writing. essentially, Davriel Kane can basically absorb or mimic the powers of others, but a big thing that he's good at, and one of the ways he binds demons specifically to himself, is through contracts and litigation law. So he'll sign a demonic pact, but he's so inherently good at working these packs to his own advantage, that he actually outwits the demons that he's trying to entrance him.
So Liliana should have gone and spoken to him about the whole
the big consensus is that most of the modern storyline would not have happened if Liliana had just gone to Davriel Kane first and gone, these 4 demons are trying to get my eternal soul.
Yeah, can you just look at the fine print
here? Look at this contract for me,
and he goes, who's this Bolus guy? Because he's got you scuppered, sorry.
But throughout Children of the Nameless, it starts off this idea that the protagonist thinks that this Davriel Kane character, she doesn't quite know his planeswalker status, but that Davriel is in charge of demons and he's killing townsfolk on the plane of Innistrad. But then we find out that this isn't the case. But what is the case is that Davriel Kane is something of a fop and a dandy who really all he wants to do is lounge around drinking wine and play with his nice shirt, which is an incredibly black character thing, but not ostensibly evil.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, exactly. Like just the whole thing of just get off my lawn, kids. Like that grandpa, is it Mr. Wilson? Yeah. Mr. Wilson did nothing wrong. Dennis was a menace.
My lord, I quite like Lord of the Rings, which is why when you said Sauron earlier, I was like, a reference I can get behind. And now you've just brought in Dennis the Menace. So
I brought in Mr. Wilson. Okay. Mr. Wilson's a stand-up guy.
Jeez. All right, okay.
Anyway, so looking, so we've kind of done a little like a drive-by of like their mechanics. A quick look at a little drive-by of their creature types. Obviously we spoke about demons. If you're looking at actual like not classes, but the actual like different types of cells, you've got hags, gorgons, shades, spectres, vampires, zombies, horrors, nightmares, and liches as kind of like the primary ones. Obviously, you get humans, you get cores, you get orcs, you get spirits, that kind of thing, but those are kind of across all of them. Specifically, these are obviously, like, some of them, like, horrors and nightmares, as we've said, are very hard to argue as being ambiguous in their morality. But obviously, you are getting all of the, like, the nasty, like, more typical horror film kind of creature types. When you look at classes, again, it's a little bit it's quite indicative of the colour. You've got warlocks, which is a new addition, which obviously covers the more witchy and haggy side of spellcasters. You have assassins, mercenaries, rogues, which are all,
rogues is a big one.
As you would inherently think would be negative. Like it's hard to be. I mean, unless you're like talking about like Robin Hood as being, they're dashing rogue.
But the rogues that are dashing, because there is a Robin Hood character in Robber of the Rich,
exactly.
But they tend to be more in red.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, the anarchic challenge to the system.
Yeah.
Sort of, win at any cost.
Yeah.
Versus...
Whereas Black doesn't want to challenge the system; it makes its own system and ignores your system.
Yeah, sure. Especially on planes like Ravnica, you get a lot of rogue characters which are essentially bailiffs or hitmen for like, the guilds and stuff like that.
Like Dimir actually has a fairly decent, like obviously in the first Ravnica set they didn't even exist. It was the non-guild. But they have way more like official and like typical job roles now, which is quite nice. It's information brokers, as you say, and things like that. And then clerics also it kind of falls down into as well. Black and white being a very much cleric colour base.
Yeah, pretty much anything which white has in terms of the more sort of religious based classes, black will also parallel and have on the flip side of the coin.
So you've got like Shadowborn Apostles, which are clerics, and obviously they devote themselves and sacrifice themselves to go and get demons from your deck.
Yeah, I mean,
that's very flavourful.
Edgewalker is the archetypal cleric card in EDH, and that's a black-white card.
Yeah, exactly. So those are kind of like again, there are very few outliers when it comes to black in terms of like you're not very shocked by the cards, the creature types and the creature matchups and the classes that are black. Again, it's quite atypical of itself.
Yeah.
So if you look at like say a very specific current look at the state of black, let's look at say the latest core set. Magic 2020, because that's a really good example of take away the bells and the whistles and the specific flavour ties that you have with specific sets. Say like with Theros, there's always going to be specifically a reanimation because of the way that it's kind of working with the underworld. Obviously, it's going to be an enchantment-based constellation kind of theme. Obviously, in Kaladesh, there was always artifacts in every single colour. So if you take all of that away and go back to down to like a normal core set, you do have lots of graveyard interaction. You've got a lot of things like Blood for Bones, of where you sacrifice a creature and you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then you also return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Very, very good card. But it also works with things like vampire. There's a vampire theme. If you look at, say, the marquee mythic for black was Sorin, Vengeful Bloodlord. Vengeful Bloodlord.
No, Vengeful Bloodlord was the black-white one from Ravnica.
It was... Hang a second. Imperious Bloodlord.
Imperious Bloodlord.
Imperious Bloodlord.
Oh my lord, they really need to come up with some better ways to name Sorin cards.
Yeah, well, I think the idea is they with the core set, they kind of strip back, because he's mono black in this set.
Yeah.
Whereas typically he's a white black planeswalker.
Except for his first iteration. Yeah.
Yeah, again.
Which, so you're saying, like, they're kind of going back to the roots.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he works specifically with his vampire theme. There's quite a few vampires in the set as well, kind of solidifying it as a vampire colour. Whereas before, maybe it would have focused more on zombie interaction and zombie synergies. Instead, now there's more vampire synergies.
Yeah.
There's a fair amount of discard. You've got Mind Drop. You've got Duress as well. So you've got a fair amount of like picking your opponent's hands apart. Even in the core set, it was a tutor effect. It's a fair tutor effect. It's one that you and your opponent both go and get a card and put it on top.
Sure.
Symmetry.
Oh, there was one
scheming symmetry.
There was one just like that. Going back to Eldraine, you had the Wishclaw Talisman.
Wishclaw Talisman,
which again
exactly.
was the artifact where you could go and shoot something. The Wishclaw Talisman gets given to an opponent. They get to go wish for something. So these again tutors with downsides.
Yeah, precisely. And then lots of life gain and life loss triggers. So things like the Aerialist, the Vampire Aerialist, where whenever you gain life, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and that kind of thing. Like same with Knight of the Ebon Legion, a vampire that beginning of your end step, if a player's lost 4 or more life, he gets +1/+1 counter. So lots of caring about the little dings up and down. As it's going, as well as the graveyard recursion. So this is a very solidified way of black working without any extra additional flavour.
Yeah, it's not looking to combo off like blue. It's not looking to smash face like green or red. It's doing these little trade-offs here and there.
And then its creatures tend to be a bit smaller. They tend to have the evasion. So there's a few of them that are either 2/2 flies for 3 or 1/1 flies for 3. That again gets bigger when the opponent loses life or whenever you lose life. That kind of effective where it has a little caveat to get strong, and most of it works about these little drains, these little pings, which is quite nice. Its marquee removal spell in the set is still Murder, which is still 3 mana, destroy any creature, instant speed, very good.
It's just the classic, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's got Sorin's Thirst in the set as well, so black to deal 2 damage and you gain 2 life to a creature. That kind of thing. It's got things like Soul Salvage, where you can return two creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. This idea of your things are likely to die, which is fine because you're going to be able to get them back again. Yeah. And then you just keep doing this, this rotationary thing of where the cycle of life, death, rebirth. It's quite nice. And I don't think it's particularly... I think it's very specifically indicative of what Black's trying to do at the moment. And especially looking at Theros. Theros is going to be a good heyday for Black in the way that, say, a Courier a few months down the line is likely to be a blue-green kind of day.
Sure.
Not the green needs any bloody help.
Well, we presume so because they're talking about behemoths.
Yeah,
behemoths are
exactly.
blue-green. Yeah,
and you think more big sea monsters, you think more Naya. The big crazy.
Yeah, Naya's a good shout. Actually,
side.
Pretty much everything except Black.
Yeah, exactly. And then its big creature of the set was Villis, Broker of Blood.
Villis, Broker of Blood.
Which I completely forgot was actually in a core set. I, for some reason, had thought it was in one of the commander sets.
It's because it works so well with Kirik, son of Yorgmoth.
Yeah.
You feel like they should have been in the
inherently
same deck.
it's just a
they're
partners. They're partners. You play them together, and you don't allow that as a house rule.
Could you
by
imagine
the way.
if they came with partner with?
Yeah, right. Well, this is like, I know.
Oh my lord!
I know.
It's bad enough that they can go in the same deck.
Yeah, so it's quite, so it's very, it still has its 2/2 Walking Corpse Zombie a card, so it hasn't lost its zombie flavour, and there are, as Gravedigger as well, these marquee cards.
Do you know what? We haven't even spoken, we've been speaking about vampires as being like the archetypal black creature. We haven't even spoken about, we could do a whole episode on zombies.
Well, this is the thing, this is where we're looking kind of like how, when we've done all these episodes, we've kind of looked at how the colour is now in a very thin margin, we've touched on cards from the last few years, and with some examples of even further going back. Whereas if you look at how it is now, zombies have been done to death for so many sets, and in so many different ways that it's not that you're going to run out of mechanical space, but if we ever go back to Innistrad, for example, you don't want the last 3 sets to have also been zombies, or you don't want to get to a point of where you can't make cards that are good enough to be playable because all of the other cards in all the other sets synergize so well that it pushes it over the edge, kind of thing. You still need to flex it around a little bit, and if we have been focusing a little bit on planes like Innistrad and focusing a little bit more as Sorin as the marquee planeswalker for the core set, then I can see why, especially with this loss of life and gain of life, it works way better for vampires rather than if you're going to have your generic reanimation spells instead of Gravedigger is a bad example because it's a zombie creature card that gets something back from the graveyard, but you want to have generic graveyard interaction, and then you kind of want your your synergistic life gain, life loss effects to fit for your creature type, and I think that fits quite nicely.
I think it's funny just hearing you talk about zombies actually then just now really makes me think that actually when I just said about we could talk about zombies, in my head I was thinking about Innistrad zombies being the very sort of classic Night of the Living Dead zombie, whereas actually you go into any set, not vampires can't really fit into any set. It was a little bit of a stretch that they went into Kaladesh with the Aetherborn, but at least it was something new.
I would argue that it's kind of like the Naga thing of where it's far enough away from a vampire. You probably should have gone for another one, but they didn't. Whereas with Naga, but at least they tried. Don't talk to me about Nagas. I don't get me angry. Just get Naga.
Whereas they tried something new with Aetherborns where it was like this is what we would call a vampire in Kaladesh. Whereas with zombies, you've got like all mummies are zombies.
Yeah.
A lot of things in Golgari and Ravnica are zombies.
Yeah.
Zombie is
Scabs, in Innistrad as well. Maybe should have been constructs.
So maybe because we oftentimes on this podcast we've actually made the distinction, even though mechanically they're the same, of creatures and classes, because creature types.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose zombie could almost fall into in a D&D sense as being a class.
I would agree.
Are you an undead corpse?
Yeah.
Whatever that means, you're a zombie.
Undead would be quite a good way to do it. So you could say undead skeleton, undead zombie, undead vampire. I mean, obviously it would mean that you'd have to have 3 types if you wanted to add a class on the end of that. But yeah, looking at I think the Scabs maybe should have been a slightly different type of zombie to the regular zombies. Okay, it helps the synergy across them quite well. But in the same way, maybe the Falconwrathy kind of vampires should have different synergy with the other tribe. I mean, that doesn't work when you work, especially now they're doing single sets and everything kind of has to work much more succinctly.
Yeah.
That's going to be really difficult to do.
It is difficult.
But I'm surprised, when you mentioned the Amonkhet, I'm surprised that considering they were white zombies, you still just called them zombies instead of something else.
Well, I mean, because they...
But what else could you call them?
You could call them mummies, but mummies were actually more of a character thing because that's how zombies were expressed on...
Yeah, exactly.
Amonkhet, right?
Yeah. So maybe the whole point now is that it's easier. And again, zombies just have been done a little bit to death, and you can put them on any plane. So if you need
they're going to be in the upcoming Theros set.
Yeah, exactly, because of the returns. Yeah,
We've got a zombie Hydra as well.
Oh dear.
Pelakros is back.
I'm so excited for this.
I was watching a Pleasant Kenobi video about literally the day before that got spoiled, and he was saying, one of my top things about what I want to see in Theros, Pelakros, he meant the world to me when I first started playing Magic. Yeah. I'd love to see him come back as a zombie. Yeah, I'd love to see him come back as a zombie because I kind of think, why can't you do that? But they won't do it. And literally the next day there was a spoiler for a zombie Hydra. Yeah.
And he's pretty brutal as well. Yeah. So but I think the idea is that you can kind of drop zombies into any kind of set. So maybe it's a little bit more ubiquitous, whereas vampires can feel. I mean, you tend not to get vampires in other colours specifically, apart from a little bit of red. Like you won't get a mono blue vampire reasonably.
No, they won't come in any mono colours other than red.
No, we got white ones, didn't we? Actually, I'm just literally telling lies. Ixalan gave us white vampires.
Oh, can they just? Oh, I'm gonna edit this bit out.
Anyway, so if we're going to say so that was looking at the core set now and how it's represented in its latest core set. Let's go back to the first core set. Let's look at how
we're going back to Alpha.
Yeah. And this is actually one of the more interesting ones. I say more interesting because white was actually bizarre. White was completely all over the place.
Yeah.
Blue was inherently actually quite simple, whereas black's got a lot. It's got a lot of depth to it, and I think also that it's quite succinct in how it looks. It's not as confused as white looked to be. But typically, you're looking. It has its top end is very, very strong. It's got things like Lord of the Pit, which is a massive, massive creature. It costs a massive cost to keep in play, as you would expect from being a black creature. But it's a 7/7 flying trample, which without directly looking immediately now, I think is the biggest creature in the alpha set. But you have to sacrifice one of your own creatures during your upkeep, or it deals 7 damage to you and you have to tap it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right then.
And then you have cards like Demonic Horde as well, which is a 5/5 for 3 black. And you can tap to destroy any one land.
So it had land destruction in the same way as... So, I mean, I guess all the different colours, as we previously discussed, had some sort of land destruction.
Yeah, but this is repeatable land destruction. You have to pay black during your upkeep, or you have to tap it, and then you lose a land of your opponent's choice.
So that still ties in with what we were saying earlier about black being very devoted to itself.
Precisely. But then it also has Nightmare, which is a 5 and a black flying XX equal to the number of swamps that you control. Which, to this day, is still not too far behind the curve of what it should be.
No, but I suppose... black isn't necessarily something that cares about lands in almost any way. It's really
No.
not the land colour.
No, but then because at the same time it does have a fair bit of mana acceleration, we'll call it, but we're going to get to that in just a second. But it also has Senga Vampire as its premier creature, which is a 4/4 flying 4/4 flyer for 3 black that whenever a creature that it dealt damage to would be killed or destroyed.
Is that in Alpha that came?
In Alpha, absolutely.
Oh, I didn't realise Senga Vampire was all the way there.
Back in the day, yeah. And it gets +1/+1 counter whenever a creature it dealt damage to is destroyed. That vampiric effect of once you've killed the thing, especially if Senga Vampire has dealt damage, you get some of its lifeblood back. And then you even have like Frozen Shade, which is a card that you can pump any amount of black mana in to make infinitely bigger. Not infinitely bigger because I don't think you can go infinite in Alpha, but that idea of where its top end's pretty good. At the same time, its defensive play is considerable, considering it has 3 natural regenerators. It has Zombie Master, which gives all other zombies a +1/+1 and the ability to regenerate.
Yep.
Which is ridiculous. At that point, you have at least there's another one that's circumstantial, but there's 5 different cards just in that set that can sit there and wall you.
Yeah.
They can just sit and wall you. And yeah, back in the day, there was a different terminology between destroy and bury. Bury got around the regeneration thing. It essentially was a shorthand for destroy, and it can't be regenerated.
Okay.
So there is a degree of that in the early days of Magic. But having 3 regenerators sat on the field, as well as having this top end that you could get to that was quite powerful, makes me feel like that the playstyle for Black was inherently very strong.
Yeah.
And then if you look at, like, say, the basic terminology in terms of flavour, obviously we've spoken about this before about how you don't have a storyline really in Alpha.
No, in Alpha they kind of seem to rely much more on sort of established archetypes in fantasy. And although, obviously they did their own thing, they weren't necessarily looking to do like a narrative.
No, it was representational more than anything else.
Yeah.
But you look at these are literal card names: Gloom, Fear, Sacrifice, Nightmare, Terror, Weakness. Like, these are literally the card name itself. It's not pussyfooting around anything. It's literally just using these words as card names, which makes it so evocative.
Yeah, it's really cool.
This is like with White, where it had 1 mana, +7/+7 to block you, righteousness. It feels like it, and then you go, no offense, but terror. Like, you just strike terror into your hand or fear into your opponent. It's crazy. It has a lot of creature removal, shock. It has.
No, it doesn't have shock. Shock.
No, that's. Oh, good. That's it. Cut the recording. So it has weakness, which is -2/-1 to a creature. It has Royal Assassin, where it can tap to destroy.
I love me a
creature.
Royal Assassin.
It has Drain Life. It has Pestilence in the set. Pestilence was from Alpha, yeah. So 2 black, and you can pay a black to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player, which is totally fair, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you have all these 3 creatures that can regenerate for a black mana.
Well, I suppose, because we often talk about white being the other side of the coin, especially in Alpha, when we were speaking about white, black and white were definitely the sort of light and dark of each other.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of white's big things is that it does have mass removal, it does have all these things, but it's very fair.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that black is fair in a different
yeah,
way. Like
yeah.
it is, but it's the flip side, right?
Yeah. Well, this is another thing. So, coming, that was actually my next point. Is it is the counter to white. It has the Black Knight to the White Knight. It has the Bad Moon to the Crusade. Like, so it clearly did want to keep up in the same kind of way that white did, but instead it had, all of these destroy effects and everything, whereas white had all of these enchantments and stuff, which strangely, if we look at Gloom, which is quite the card, it's an enchantment for 2 and a black. White spells cost 3 more mana to cast. Circles of Protection cost 3 more mana to cast. So 5 of the cards in your set, as well as any of the other cards that you want to play, cost 3 more mana to play specifically against white spells. Now, again, Alpha has a lot of these. I'm white and I'm going to nerf blue, or I'm red and I'm going to nerf blue, or I'm black and I'm going to nerf white. And it also has another one, which is a really dicky one, which is Death Grip, black, an enchantment that sits in play. Black to destroy a green spell as it's being cast. So it just counters a green spell in black for black on an enchantment that sits in play.
Wow.
Yeah, like black was not messing around.
Something I'm noticing when talking about these black cards in Alpha is that in more modern sets, although you obviously got the removal, and that's the way that black goes out into the world and interacts with things. A lot of what it does is also dealing with your own board state and your own permanence. Like, that's the way that you get advantage as opposed to just hard removal.
Yeah.
Whereas in Alpha, they obviously hadn't established that yet, and it's like, black's going to come after people, like, specifically.
And it specifically says destroy a green spell, not counter a spell, whereas counter spell itself has the word counter target spell on it. So
interesting.
They kind of consider it to be different. I guess that obviously they might have looked at spells on the stack as things you can destroy and or exile or whatever, blah, 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 blah.
I suppose, would that mean that certain effects would happen, whereas countering would stop?
No, because I think they errated it, as far as I'm aware. I mean, the card's called Death Grip, and it's the kind of thing, if you play that against a mono green deck in EDH, you are a dickhead.
I mean, how much? I'm going to look up how much it is, because
exactly.
I might
well,
no,
honestly, there are so many cards when I was looking through this list that I keep forgetting that I really want to get. So looking at, say, reanimation effects, okay, you had Resurrection in white in Alpha, but you did have Raise Dead, which returns to hand. You had Nether Shadow, which naturally comes back by itself from the graveyard to the battlefield. And then you did have, as I said, Animate Dead, which is the enchantment, which, yes, okay, it gives it a -1/-0 to its power. And obviously, there's the caveat of it being a targeted enchantment aura. But they still had a fair amount of reanimation effects. Land destruction, obviously we had Demonic Horde. We also had Evenal Presence, which is for an enchantment for a single black that turns a land into a swamp. Not in addition to, into a swamp.
Just into a swamp.
Into a swamp. So turn 1, I go island, no, it's a swamp.
Well,
turn 2, I go island, no, it's a swamp. Now you can no longer counterspell for the next 3 turns.
There is a spell, though, isn't there, which turns...
Yeah, Polluted Land. Polluted Land or something like that.
Yeah, so it
turns it into a swamp, and then whenever they tap it, they lose 2 life or something like that.
Yeah, so
they can just choose not to use
which
it.
Which kind of feels like a very black thing, this idea of infecting people.
The land, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, again, Alpha has a lot of land destruction anyway across the colours, but it has specifically Sinkhole. Black, destroy target land. Which is obviously just that much bit better than Stone Rain. Which obviously these kinds of effects, like when we're talking about all these cards, if you look them up, you'll see why they don't do these cards anymore, because they are exceptionally polarizing and super difficult to justify balancing. It was also the only color to interact with anti. So it was I'm going to say a card now. Contract from Below. Now, if you don't know what Contract from Below does, oh boy, 1 black. Discard your current hand and draw 8 new cards, adding the first drawn to your anti pile. Remove this card from your deck before playing if you are not playing for anti. Now, obviously, if you're not playing for anti, these cards don't have any effect whatsoever, but this is 1 mana, draw 8 cards.
Wow. Wow.
not in blue. So it's absurd. And then Dark Pact, black, sorcery. Without looking at it first, you swap the top card of your deck with either card that's antied. So if you're playing against an opponent who's also playing black and they say flips over one of their really good black spells, you can swap the top card of your library with that spell on top of your library, and then you'll draw it next turn. Or you can, if you had a really good. So the bad thing about anti is that you might lose your Lord of the Pit, say.
Yeah.
And that'll be, oh no, I can't possibly. And then you play Dark Patch and you go, nah, never mind, I'll swap it for the swamp instead. Like, what? That's mental. So this ability to play around with the anti was obviously this idea again, Dark Pact. There's another card in the set which you should know, Demonic Tutor.
Yeah.
Contract from Below. It works with this idea of you are doing a deal with the devil. And I can see why in the early stages of Magic they thought there was this degree of Satanism in the game, because
Satanicism.
Yeah, I don't know why does it sound weird? Well, that sounded weird because that was wrong. But
because I was Satanism wrong.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this idea of being able to do a deal with the devil to gain an advantage, like no other colour can do literally go into your deck and get any card and put it into your hand.
Well, I mean, if we just take a pause on Demonic Tutor. So we've been talking a lot with the way black is represented in modern Magic, about how things usually cost you something to gain some ridiculous advantage. And there have been black tutors. There are tutors in every colour, but black tutors tend to be the ones which are very, very good at getting exactly what you need. But it's usually for some kind of life cost, or like Liliana Vess as a Planeswalker gets it from and puts it on top, but you don't have to reveal the card. It's like there's no kind of caveat to what you can grab as long as you're doing something else. Demonic Tutor is still played in a lot of Eternal formats, and there is no cost. You literally
sorcery
pay your
speed.
mana.
It's literally the
sorcery
only
speed, but that's
literally the only caveat.
But that's nothing really to do with flavour.
No.
Like
Vampiric Tutor is inherently better because it's an instant. I mean, yes, I think it goes to the top of your library instead, and it's 2 life to do so, and it's only a single mana.
But at least that Flavorfully, at least then it costs you the life to do so.
And it's literally. I guess also it's called Vampiric Tutor, and this was called Demonic Tutor. And the idea is you are literally doing a deal with the devil. This isn't the set that has a lot of flavour text, so. Obviously, it doesn't have flavor text for it, which is unfortunate because I'd like to hear a little bit about it.
Sure, but I think the original artwork's fairly evocative of what it does, which you can't be said for a lot of the early sets.
No, exactly. And then there's this idea of mana production. So obviously, Dark Ritual is a big card from the original set. The idea of going turn 1 Dark Ritual into Hypnotic Spectre was a very feared play because it would start attacking on turn 2 and start picking your hand apart.
See, Dark Ritual, again, if we take a little pause here, because this is the 1 black to get 3 black mana into your mana pool. Now, this was seen as being one of the cycle of the sort of 5 cards that were those 1 mana cards. They give you some sort of effect.
Yeah, I comment they've got a specific name.
Yeah, but would you say that this is a card that is still evocative of black? This idea of paying 1 mana for 3?
Take the name out of the equation and it's been now drilled in by all of these phoretic rituals and all these. I've played with I played a fair amount of Storm, and I used to play a reverberation deck. I can't remember the enchantment, the one in Pyromancer Ascension.
Sure.
So I've played a lot of red spells that generate mana, and I've played them for so long now that it does inherently feel like a red thing. Because it does feel that flare of fire,
now, right?
Flare of magma of where
because it doesn't stay in your mana pool. No. It's like you have to use it now and then move on.
Exactly. But obviously the initial idea in black was it was the ritual. The idea of you are. I guess the whole point is that they move the flavor away from it being ritualistic to be like, as in like necromantically ritualistic or ritualistic in terms of you are tapping into some evil magic. Instead, it was more this idea of this eruption of energy.
Yeah.
So I'd still think that Dark Ritual is an inherently black card, but they did this with the Cabal Ritual as well. Yeah. Which is like 3 black, and then if you have Threshold, you got 5 black. Clearly, at just some point, they felt like Red needed. Maybe I don't know whether the decision was that black didn't need it anymore, or that red needed it more, or maybe it made more sense for them. And I can see why the change.
Mechanically, I suppose this is something that is quite black, but it's how it is the flavor in every other aspect that kind of changes the bent of what it is.
Exactly. So if you look at another card in the set, Sacrifice, it's the only other one that does it. Destroy one of your creatures for a single black mana. Without being able to regenerate it, to add adds to your mana a number of black mana equal to its casting cost. So again, another ritual, but this one feels, and the artwork again, like we can't show obviously the artworks as we're doing this, but go back and look at Alpha's artworks because they are a bit like they're it's the same way that White
problematic.
In the same way that White has some really risque kind of like Crusade Knight kind of artworks. Like this Sacrifice isn't a very nice artwork. And the idea again is that it's mana production, but at the cost of a life.
Yeah.
So the Dark Ritual side, I can see the idea in the same way Demonic Tutor, if they don't have the negative side tacked onto it yet. And at this point, Black didn't have to do it at a cost of anything other than making the game nearly get banned for having satanic affiliation. Quickly go through one last like little thing looking through, and that's that it has manipulation effects as well. Whether it's death manipulation of where you would be dealt damage, there's a card called Simulacrum, and you can have it dealt damage to that instead. It also had one of my favorite cards, Word of Command. Black sorcery. You look at your opponent's hand and you force them to cast a spell from their hand using their mana.
Really?
Yes, exactly. And the artwork's great because it's literally all black and two eyes.
Wow.
Like, look, that's Word of Command right there.
Yeah, it's literally just a black background with two
eyes. And unfortunately, it's not particularly cheap otherwise. Oh my good God and graces when I put this into decks. It's amazing. It forces your opponent to play their spells.
What's the ruling if you don't have mana open?
I guess you can only... So you still get to look at your opponent's hands, and it says... Choose a card that your opponent can legally play using the mana from their mana pool land. So the thing is, obviously, if you tap in response, that's still in your mana pool.
Yeah.
So, realistically, you can't, imagine like a blue player playing like a counterspell with counterspell mana backed up, and then you cast your Word of Command back in response to then use one of their other counterspells.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing, these are the kind of spells that Nathan really likes, obviously. He doesn't like fair magic. But yeah, you can't...
you get particularly evil when you talk about yourself in the third person.
I really do, I know, it's terrible. But so this idea of manipulation as well, being able to manipulate your opponents, and there's also Nettling Imp, which forces one of your opponents to block with one of their creatures. So this idea of you're telling your opponent what to do, this domination of them, it's not like control magics from Blue where you control the thing and the thing. It's like, no, I'm forcing you to block with the thing, or I'm forcing you to play this spell. This idea of, this overbearing... like overlording, I guess it's called. I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way. But so black, and this is just like a few. I could go into like every single card in Alpha is actually really interesting for black. But as you can see, it has it has its top end, like it has its defensive capabilities. It has removal when the other colours don't necessarily have as good a removal.
Yeah.
Okay, because its removal spell Terror can only destroy a non-black, non-artifact creature, which for the most part gets everything else apart from its own colour.
I mean, that's a trope that kind of gets carried through in a lot of black cards is non-black. So look at something enchantment like Attrition, you know, or Doomblade, for example.
Weirdly enough, most of the cards or creatures that have Swamp Walk are black.
Yeah, that is kind of strange.
But obviously, you would expect if you can walk through a swamp fine, you're from the swamp, which would have to be from a swamp, which is where black mana comes from.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because Scathes, the Lord of the Zombie Master, I got it wrong earlier, I gave +1/+1 and regenerate. No, it gives all of your zombies Swamp Walk and regenerate.
Oh, sure.
And then there's Bog Wraith, I think, that also has Swamp Walk. So there were a few cards again in Alpha that specifically worked well against their own colour. So in case you're playing mono black on mono black, you would have some advantage if you happen to draw your particular card. And then there is Lich in the set as well. Black. You lose all your life. If you would gain life later in the game, instead you draw that many cards. For every point of damage you would take, you have to sacrifice a permanent. Creatures destroyed this way cannot be regenerated. If you lose the enchantment or suffer a point of damage without sending a card to the graveyard, you lose the game.
Excellent.
Yeah, which is again like that's so like Lich. That's exactly what a Lich would be like. You sacrifice like you kind of for all your ungodly thing. You have to sacrifice your own resources to stay alive. But it's just the first one. Like you lose all life.
Yeah.
Like thanks, cheers, bye bye. And we have looked. There are other cards that have been similar. I think Lich's Mirror is banned in EDH anyway, but it's an artifact from like Alara. I think if I'm deep cutting properly there, and it has the same kind of effect. But yeah, anyway, the whole point, there's quite a few different cards as well in Alpha that work better and scale better with extra mana. Frozen Shade being black to give +1/+1 to a 0/1. And obviously, when you have all this extra mana generation, like say Sacrifice and Dark Ritual, obviously that translates quite well into expensive effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you can see, black got a bad rap for a good reason. It had like some, don't get me wrong, like blue has some douchey cards in it, but black's cards are very, especially from a flavor point of view, are inherently very nasty, very evil, and even its righteous Black Knight, battle doesn't need a purpose. The battle is its own purpose. You don't ask why a plague spreads or a field burns. Don't ask why I fight. Good, nice righteous reaction there, Black Knight. It's one of the only cards that has flavor text. So yeah, again, like so, this is a good example of how Black has moved a little bit further away from this inherently evil, snickering, twirling the mustache kind of thing. But even then, like, it's not like these things are wanting to be evil. They're just inherently misunderstood creatures that are going to be considered to be horrors. Like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing nice about a demonic horde.
Sure.
Destroying a land every turn. But yeah, I think Alpha did black very well in setting it up to be a very nasty colour. So it's no wonder that it kind of stuck to it.
It does seem like they've scaled it back though in terms of just how unbelievably oppressive it can be. Which is actually, I think, something that can be said for the entirety of Alpha.
Alpha was the balls to the walls. We don't even know what's going to work. It was like the pre-Urza's block of Urza's block. Because Urza's block did a lot of very stupid things that they very much know that they shouldn't have done. But yeah, Alpha was very much throwing a lot of things at the wall, and sometimes just because it sticks to the wall doesn't mean you don't need to knock the wall down afterwards.
Exactly. Cool. Well, yeah, we've spoken at length about Alpha. It's just, we could do whole episodes on Alpha. Like, it's just so interesting. Cool. All right, then before we wrap up then, we've spoken about where black is, we've spoken about where black's come from. I mean, I haven't really thought about this. I'm kind of going to be winning this one. Where would you like to see black go?
This is the thing, like, it's not like with, say, white, where we had, I mean, white, again, when we spoke about it, and it's still going to be for a little bit, a very hot topic of how to quote unquote, again, air quotes, fix the problem of white. Black kind of doesn't need any help. Like, even if you look at the core set, it's got a very well established creature base. It's got several different creature types and tribes that it can very much lean into, that it has excessive support for already. In terms of identity for the graveyard, okay, there's only so many ways you can mess around with the graveyard, but it's always going to be a big part of the game, so inherently it's already got that kind of tied down. I think it could afford maybe be a little bit more flexible with like the way it gains its advantage, because we didn't really talk about this, but there's a lot of cards that will say draw 3 cards and lose 3 life, like Ambition's Cost, Painful Truths,
Sign in Blood,
all of these kinds of effects are basic, like simple lose 2 life, draw 2 card kind of effects. So where it needs to go, I think it's okay to say that a colour's kind of got it in the bag at the moment, and I think between red, green, and between green and black, I think they're both so solid with what they do. I think green gets too much these days, so the problem is it's going to have to kind of dial it back, and that's an interesting one to talk about. I think looking at, say, colours like red in the next episode is going to be a bit more difficult, but I think the black and green are the two colours that I'd say most don't need any particular help, and they can just carry on trucking. And green will definitely be a colour that we can argue about certain things that might need to be dialed back on.
Sure.
The only thing about black is obviously it needs to find a way to deal with artifacts and enchantments a bit more readily. Again, I stand by what I said with the other colours of where you need to have your weaknesses. You can't just do everything.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also, I think there's enough black cards that marry up with other colours, especially if you're playing in a format like EDH, things like Utter End and whatever else, which destroy or exile permanents.
Yeah,
right?
And you've got things like Meteor Golem and Unstable Obelisk and Scour from Existence. I mean, they're all 7 mana answers, but the idea is that, look, I mean, you can't have everything.
No.
In the same way that you have to go to artifacts to get white some card draw, sometimes you have to go to artifacts to get some enchant removal for black. Like, the whole point of what we're talking about this for is kind of to identify that the colour pie is necessary.
Yeah.
And just because back in the day it did things that it doesn't do anymore, and just because these days it doesn't do certain things that it needs, doesn't mean that's going to necessarily change too much going forwards, because we have established this format over a long period of Magic.
Yeah.
And you can't just go back on such a long history and go, well, actually, let's just make every colour's purple. Fuck it. Why not just have everything be the same?
Yeah, that's true.
At that point, what's the point of having the distinction between the colours? So, I mean, but it's a long answer short. I don't think it needs much going forward.
No, I think that's true mechanically. I think for me, I completely agree with everything you just said. What I quite like, and this kind of goes back a little bit of when I espoused that I loved how realised black was flavourfully in terms of its creature typings. The rare instances where they've gone against that. So we've always said, like, angels are white. There have been black-white angels in the past, especially in Ravnica block. There's been representations of black-white angels. I've had the Curse. I mean, there are lots of black-white vampires, but most of them are quite at ease with their black side.
Yeah, I think Selenia Dark Angel was a Phyrexian corrupted angel.
Yeah, exactly.
So
what I'd love to see is I'd love to start seeing some classically black creature types maybe go into other colours against their black nature. So what if we saw one day a black-green demon? What would that look like?
Yeah, nice.
Or like a black-red, I don't know, anything like a black green vampire. What would a black green vampire look like? You know, that'd be quite cool. So I kind of hope that they do play around with things. Maybe they won't, and I don't think that will be a bad
when you
thing.
Think about it, like the black tribes are very black.
They're very
you've
black,
got some blue zombies in Innistrad. Okay, you got some white vampires and white zombies. I mean, I guess they have flexed them, but it does feel deliberate to the sets. So I guess it's interesting to see, like, look, talking about Ikoria, for example. Yes, okay, Theros is going to be a very easily like capitalized color for black anyway, because it's going to be resurrecting. It's going to be lots of graveyard shenanigans and all that nonsense. But yeah, say going to Ikoria, like, what are the Behemoths going to feel like? From that set?
Are they all going to be like a Gurmag Angler, where they're all going to be like undead beasts?
Or could you do the flip side and have the black tribe being the humans that are fighting against all these behemoths?
That'd be quite good.
And all of the, like, you know, the behemoth side isn't necessarily, obviously it's like nature, it's like Zendikar, where you can't really argue that the royal's a bad thing. Obviously everyone's fighting to survive against it. But yeah, you could argue, say maybe that the black tribes in Ikoria are going through things for a self-serving means, but it's to survive against the nature around them.
Yeah, so that's what I kind of want to see with black. I think, and maybe if they did that too much, it would make it not as special. You wouldn't get these characters which are interesting, because it's nice to have black being very realised. Yeah. But having said that, I'm excited to see what kind of characters, especially in legendary creatures. I am an EDH player. That's what I'm all about. I'd like to see where they take it.
I can't actually think of, like, the last time we had an inherently quote-unquote evil character that was just mono black. Like, beyond Obnixilis, like, I
mean, things like Bells and Lock, the demons,
but that's kind of
that's
a bit too easy. But you know what I mean? Like, obviously Nicol is predominantly a black, like, that's why he's 3 black pips in his initial Elder Dragon, and obviously he's got a bit of blue and a bit of red. But yeah, I can't remember the last time. I think maybe that's deliberate what they're trying to move away from anyway. And at that point, maybe we double down. Maybe we go to a set where they are the most unbelievable, evil, maniacal, horrible, Armageddon-y kind of. I would like to see a plane where you have all of the different tribes vying to destroy the plane.
Yeah, well, we'll be going back to Phyrexia soon enough.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Oh, I forgot about Phyrexia. Okay,
all right.
Never mind.
We're going to stop there, because otherwise this will be another hour-long podcast, or 2-hour-long podcast. So, guys, thank you very much for joining us on our Black Colour Pie episode. We have got just red and green left to do.
Which will be interesting.
We'll also be trying to talk about Theros, because that is upcoming soon.
Indeed.
Guys, like, share, subscribe, all the stuff that you can do on the format that you're listening to us on. Please do so.
And binge.
Absolutely. The initial glut of episodes, when we throw these up, we will be trying to throw up them in lots of 3 or 4 before we start moving to our weekly or every 2 weeks format. So yeah, please catch up, listen to everything we have to say, because We have clearly a lot to say about a lot of stuff.
Again, you came for the content, stay for the waffle.
All right. Okay, guys. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
See you soon.